Hello and welcome to this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. We are going to bring you my exclusive interview with the President of Portugal, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, as Chinese President Xi Jinping is to make an official visit to that country. But before that, I want to reflect on this past weekend. Two things happened over the weekend that deeply grabbed the world's attention. First, former U.S. President George H.W. Bush passed away. Second, leaders from China and the U.S. reached a truce in Buenos Aires on the sidelines of the G20 summit on trade tariffs and decided to come back to the negotiating table. On U.S. TV, much is being said about the legacy of President Bush Sr. He is also much talked about here across the Pacific Ocean, and two aspects have stood out from the Chinese perspective. Do you want to take a guess? Well, first, of course, was his China connections. From 1974 to 1975, he served as the head of the U.S. liaison office in China. Remember, back then, the two countries still didn't have diplomatic relations, so there was no embassy. This photo of him with his beloved wife, Barbara, during a biking tour in the heart of Beijing has been widely shared on the Chinese social media. There are some things so captivating about this photo. Their laughter, for instance, so heartfelt and happy. What filled them with such joy? The freedom they felt exploring the heart of the Chinese capital on two wheels? Well, the broad streets and flatness of the Chinese city always makes biking a pleasant experience for me, for instance. But what else? Look at that Mao portrait that happened to feature so prominently in the middle of the picture, in between their faces. The photographer probably wanted to send a message that the couple was not just laughing together with each other, but also with a third potential friend, China. Yes, President Bush Sr. was the only U.S. president who had the experience of being a diplomat in China at a time when China was still not open to the world. He saw the China that was poor and lost and reeling from a decade of upheaval. He saw the purest of Chinese mentalities and emotions before the era of consumerism. Look at the faces of the Chinese passers-by who were watching right as this photo was being taken. That look of innocence was on the face of every Chinese back then. I'm sure President Bush Sr. felt that too. 43 years have passed. The world has changed so much. I must say, in U.S.-China relations, the part that has changed more has to be China and the Chinese people, the group those passers-by represented. We not only got richer, more sophisticated and more worldly, but in the eyes of many Americans, we have even become a competitor. Meanwhile, the U.S. has changed at a much slower pace. President Bush Sr.'s Beijing time influenced his feelings about China and his China policy during his term as president. Although this fast pace of change in China would have caught him by surprise, he thought from early on that the future lay in Asia and the future lay in China. What we have experienced now is a new China led by a new generation of leaders, and a U.S. also led by a new team that's only been in office for 2 years. Obviously, nobody on this current team has the kind of understanding and feelings towards China that former President Bush Sr. had. But that should not prevent the two sides from being able to see what's at stake in this relationship, behaving maturely and learning to work with each other in an effective way. The U.S. needs to treat China like an adult with respect. China needs to treat itself as a responsible adult too. I love the Chinese people. One of my dreams for our world is that these two powerful giants will continue working toward a full partnership and friendship that will bring peace and prosperity to people everywhere. This was the vision laid out by President Bush Sr. More and more people believe he was right. By the way, the second thing that's going viral in China about President Bush Sr. and his wife is their 73-year love story. May they rest in peace. Which country knows China the best in Europe? It's a highly subjective question, I know, but one country claims this title with high confidence. Portugal has had interactions with China since 500 years, and this link is still going strong. Now, next year, the two countries will mark 40 years of diplomatic relations between each other. Before the end of this year, Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to pay his first official visit to Portugal. So how will President Xi's visit shape the future of bilateral ties? How do Portuguese see their relationship with China? Welcome to a very special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from the Presidential Palace in the capital of Portugal, Lisbon. And I'm honored to be joined by His Excellency, the President of Portugal, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let me ask you, why do Portuguese believe that they understand China the best? Where do they get that confidence?
You gave the reason. We lived together for 500 years in Macau, and it has been a unique and fascinating experience. I have lectured in Macau, not for very long, but I lectured there law, political science, and administration in the 80s. And I could see, and I could witness an experience of hundreds of years. You know that Macau was never considered to be a Portuguese colony, never, because it was Chinese. But Chinese with cooperation between two countries. China was an empire by then, Portugal was an empire by then, and we cooperated. And then we turned into being and becoming republics, both of us, and went on having the same unique relationship. So, we Portuguese understand you very well. You do understand us very well. And that's why it was so easy, recently, in a very recent past, to have so many Chinese in Portugal, and so much economic and financial presence of China in Portugal, which is unique in Europe. I mean, no other country has these kind of ties, both cultural, economic, financial, social, and political.
Let's talk about the political ties first. As I mentioned, President Xi is going to visit Portugal, basically his first official visit to your country. I was talking to your foreign minister, and he says that President Xi's visit will wrap up a cycle of bilateral exchanges. So how will his visit shape the future of bilateral ties, and what can we expect? What do you expect from his visit?
Well, first of all, let me recall that this transfer was a very peaceful and very friendly one. That was also unique. But then we must admit that the world is changing. And in the balance of powers, Portugal has a very specific task, a very specific role. Because we are used for hundreds of years to becoming a kind of a platform among cultures, civilizations, oceans and continents. We are everywhere in the world. And so that's not by chance that the Secretary General of the United Nations is a Portuguese, Mr. António Guterres, or the Director General for migrations, international migrations, is another Portuguese, António Vitorino. That means that we have this talent of speaking with everybody. And this time is a time of change, geostrategic change. We look at what is happening, and what is happening is that there is a kind of a new dialogue between Asia and Western countries. Asia used to be the center of economic power before the Industrial Revolution. After the Industrial Revolution, this power came to England first and then the United States of America.
Yes.
Things are changing. You have a world with many powers, no superpower, no single superpower. And this multipolar world requires multilateralism. And Portugal is in position of being very good at it. Inside Europe, of course, the European Union is also important for the balance of power in the world. Yeah. But Portugal, because Portugal has a community of Portuguese-speaking countries, like Brazil, like Angola, like Mozambique, that form together with us a kind of unique and interesting and very prospective community. At the same time, we are in the Ibero-American community involving other Latin American countries, always belonging to Europe. And the fact of being in so many different regional groups allows us to play that role. And that role is very useful when the dialogue between China and Western countries is becoming day-to-day reality. Day-to-day reality. Not just culturally, but economically and financially. Yeah. And so Portugal has been seeing in the last 10, 15 years, but mostly in the last 5 years, an increase of Chinese presence, which is an increase of Chinese presence in Europe, and could be working together in partnership, a joint presence in other countries, in continents like South America or Africa.
Okay. Well, we have talked about 500 years of interaction between the two sides. Now 40 years of diplomatic relations. Things have changed a lot, progressed a lot. I was talking to, again, your foreign minister in Beijing, and he used the word excellent to describe bilateral ties. So you're not going to use that word again. Well,
yes, of course. No, yes, I would say it's difficult to find a word stronger than excellent. What could I say? Those relations are, in a sense, irreplaceable. Irreplaceable, because we have traditional allies, of course, inside the European Union, United States of America, Canada, and other. Well, starting with England, which was our first historic ally. But with China, it is something very special, because we are not the partners as we used to be in other partnerships, with members of a same community of culture or of civilization. Mm-hmm. Now, in the case of China, we are complementary. You have a long-lasting and very rich civilization and culture, different from ours. And that makes the difference. And we feel that we found out, not today, but 500 years ago, mm-hmm. I would say a kind of a brotherhood with you, which is irreplaceable. It's different from anything we have in our history. Wow. And in our past, present, and I'm sure future.
Okay, talking about the future, where do you want the two countries to improve to have an even stronger cooperation? Would you want to know?
Well, let me start with schools, universities. Why? Because that's the future. Education. Our universities are cooperating, working together.
Already.
We must strengthen this relation, because we're speaking of the younger generations, we're speaking of the future. Then culture. If you want to have a strong partnership, you must know each other. And to get to know each other, culture is the key point. And then of course, social involvement. I mean, it's important that social movements, Chinese and Portuguese, cooperate, that not just universities, not just schools, but also social movements, social institutions, healthcare foundations, science foundations, technological foundations, different institutions cooperate. And then of course, that goes together with economy.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you mentioned the economic factor.
Yes, the last, you know why? Because it's the easiest one.
Well, you say...
The easiest one, and it's much more difficult to work on education, culture, science, technology, society, because you look at our economy, and let me tell you, you have here the Chinese presence in the banking system, in the insurance company system, in the healthcare private system, also in that important field of energy, in some infrastructures. That means that most of the key sectors of the economy have your presence. And that happened in less than 10 years. That's why I said it's easier to cooperate economically and financially than it is culturally, educationally and socially.
Yeah, well, it is easier, but I think on the other hand, it has drawn a lot of controversy. It has drawn a lot of attention. A lot of international observers would say that China is invading Portugal with investment, that there is a special relationship between Chinese investors and the Portuguese government. How come you just let the Chinese come and take over things and while putting a cap on some other investors?
Let me also tell you a few words on our presence in China. I mean, we want to be more in China, not just speaking of trade, but speaking of Portuguese companies there, working in infrastructures, in energy also. I mean, in sectors, industrial, commercial, and agricultural sectors, where we do want to be in China. We are ready. But it should be a two-way cooperation, not just one-way cooperation. And that's very important for us. And when people think from outside, and as you said, sometimes do not understand, they say, what is happening? Why was it so quickly? And why was it China and not anyone else? I said it was quickly because the decision of privatizing the sectors was taken recently for political reasons, but also on account of the crisis. We were suffering, which was a deep crisis, as a result of structural reasons, internal reasons, but also of the worldwide and European crisis. So at the point when other countries appear almost blaming for the fact that it was Chinese investment that came to Portugal, I asked them, well, why didn't you come? Why didn't you come, being Europeans, being Americans, being coming from all over the world, being Arabs? Some of them came. And happily our economy is receiving plenty of European investment, of American investment, of Arab investment, of other Asian investment. But in those areas I mentioned, in those sectors, it happened the way it happened at a very precise moment. Of course, then the second answer that I must give to the questions I'm asked is this. Of course, you say, but that's too much. That is almost a Chinese invasion. I don't see it that way. Because when looking at our economy, we have sectors, key sectors, that are Portuguese, of course, in hands of Portuguese companies, but also European companies. Transport, communications, some crucial infrastructures, telecommunications. And in the banking system and in other areas, we have a very strong European presence, very strong, and also American presence. So I feel it's good for Portugal to balance foreign investment.
Okay, now that you are kind of out of this bailout period, right, since 2014, some people in neighboring countries, they're still skeptical about investing in Portugal, whereas it is reported that policymakers here are willing to expand your economic link with China. Why?
Well, but you know something, it's funny, because when I told you about the moment we privatized several sectors, it was already a few years ago. We were living in a deep crisis. No longer. No longer. We have a very good growth rate. We are improving in investment, in exports. We are, as to say, an example in controlling the deficit, the budget deficit, and also the external deficit, which means nowadays Portugal became a kind of a fashionable country in terms of investment. And so that's why so many are now interested in investing in Portugal. So many. Well, adding to countries like Spain or like France, strong investor, like Germany, very strong investor. As I told you, like United States of America, as a non-European investor. And I could give you other examples, like Belgium, for instance. And nowadays, this investment is increasing. At the same time, we keep on having a strong Chinese investment. That means that China took the decision, in a way predicting that Portugal would recover. And in a sense, Chinese investors anticipated our recovery. That's the lesson. The lesson of the facts is this. And this is good, because we did recover. We got advantage from your investment as from other investments. And now we look at the future, and we want more investment. For instance, you have a main project, which is the main Chinese project that crosses the world.
The Belt and Road Initiative.
Exactly.
Yes.
That could cross Portugal.
Absolutely.
Well, entering in one of our main ports or harbors. Yes. It could happen. At the same time, we could have there other investors from other countries. So you see how countries that cooperate in a very friendly way can all of them take advantage of the recovery and of the growth of our economy.
Okay, now that you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, I'm going to ask you about it. What do you see specifically in that initiative for Portugal? And how do you think Portugal can capitalize on that initiative?
I told you, well, I think Portugal, it's again going back to the past, to our history, could get advantage of the strategic position Portugal has in Europe, in Western Europe, close to other continents, receiving as a country that is always in dialogue with the ocean. So we could receive. Coming from the sea.
Yeah. However, your country has yet to sign the Memorandum of Understanding with China.
That's a point. That's a political point. But let me first tell you, it could cross Portugal, going to Europe, and could be useful for many, many countries, and useful for your initiative, but also useful for Portuguese economy. Your question, is it possible that during the visit of President Xi, Portugal would sign the Memorandum of Understanding on that subject? It is. We are negotiating it, working on it. So it is possible. It is not yet closed, not yet finished, but I know there is a lot of hard work being done together in the last few months.
Okay, my last question. You spent 4 decades as a professor of law. Many people actually call you Professor Marcelo. And then you were beloved commentator on TV. Now you're president of Portugal. Which role do you define yourself with? And also, I understand you had a program where you were giving scores to the main political players from 0 to 20. How much will you give yourself?
Well, I would say first, I'm professor.
Okay.
That's what I really... in a way, it was my dream. It was my dream. So I'm first of all a professor. Then as a professor, having not just the opportunity of speaking to 100, 200, 300, 400 students, but some millions of people, I became a communicator. And I was involved in politics as a way of lecturing, of trying to explain the way I saw the world. So, for me, it's more important to be, and always be in the future, professor, law professor.
Okay. What score would you give yourself this time as a professor to your president self?
Well, it's impossible. I mean, nobody is impartial when judging himself or herself, so I try not to. I say that I fulfilled my task. Now I'm just about to be 70, so I'm going to retire as a professor, although going on as President of the Republic. But looking at the past, I would have said that, well, I was not a bad professor. No, I was not a bad professor.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
President Sousa.
Great pleasure.
And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.